Just before they said, "I do," a dog burst into the resort's pavilion carrying a newborn baby and exposed the bride's shocking secret. Minutes later, the groom called off the wedding, and the bride was led away in handcuffs. It was Isabella and Matteo's wedding day, a sun-drenched occasion at the luxurious Azure Cove resort that everyone had eagerly awaited. But just as Isabella drew a breath to speak her vows, a sharp bark cut through the ocean breeze. All heads turned. At the entrance to the open-air pavilion stood 3 dogs, one in the lead, the other 2 flanking it like sentinels. The lead dog held a small, woven basket carefully in its mouth. A confused murmur rippled through the guests. The dogs moved with purpose down the sandy aisle, their eyes fixed ahead. When they reached the floral archway, the lead dog gently placed the basket on the ground. A faint, mewling cry came from within. "That's a baby," someone gasped. The music died. The photographer lowered his camera. Even the officiant took a step back, stunned. The dogs began to sniff the air, their movements sharp and focused. Then, a brindled dog with a nick on its ear stopped directly in front of Isabella. It sniffed her lace gown once, then again, and recoiled with a sudden, explosive bark. Isabella flinched, her hands trembling. "What is this?" Matteo demanded, stepping forward. The dog didn't relent, its barks joined by the other 2 until a cacophony echoed under the pavilion. Isabella's face went ashen. As she backed away, the dogs surrounded her, their teeth catching on her delicate gown. With a sickening rip, the fabric tore. "Get them off her!" Matteo yelled to his groomsmen. As 2 men rushed forward, a heavy, rhythmic thumping came from the entrance. A tall man strode in, dressed in worn khakis and a weathered vest, a simple wooden whistle hanging from his neck. His face was etched with the lines of a life spent outdoors, his eyes calm but piercing. At the sight of him, the dogs immediately fell silent. He raised the whistle to his lips, emitting a soft, high note, and the animals trotted to his side. The pavilion was utterly silent, save for Isabella's ragged sobs and the distant crash of waves. "Who are you?" Matteo asked, his voice thick with disbelief. The man's gaze swept from Isabella to the crying baby. "I'm a tracker," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "And these are my hounds." "Your hounds?" Matteo's anger flared. "You let your animals attack my fiancée." The tracker remained unmoved, his eyes locked on Isabella. "One of your guests abandoned that child in the mangrove forest this morning." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. "I was surveying the wildlife," the tracker continued, his tone heavy. "I heard a woman's cry. When I got closer, I saw 2 women. One was giving birth, and the other was helping her. I heard her say, 'Be quiet, or we'll be discovered.' After the baby was born, they wrapped it, left it among the roots, and hurried down the path that leads directly to this resort." Isabella's whole body began to shake. "That's impossible." Matteo stammered. "I saw them," the tracker stated firmly. "My hounds picked up their scent. This one," he said, pointing to the brindled dog, refused to leave the infant. "He brought the child straight here, following the trail." The officiant found his voice. "Are you saying the mother is here, now?" "Yes," the tracker replied, his voice dropping. "She is." His sharp eyes scanned the crowd before landing back on Isabella. And one of the women was wearing a wedding gown. The revelation was a thunderclap. Every single eye turned to Isabella, the only person in a wedding gown. "This is insanity!" Matteo shouted. "Isabella isn't pregnant." Matteo's best man, his cousin Diego, jumped to his feet. "You need to leave, now," he barked at the tracker. The tracker gave a slow, final nod. He turned, his dogs at his heels, and began to walk away. But the damage was done. The guests' whispers had turned into a roar of suspicion. Matteo's mother, a formidable woman in a silk champagne dress, stood. "Matteo, We must end these rumors now, she insisted. We must clear Isabella's name. After a tense, quiet argument, Isabella was reluctantly led by 3 women to a private cabana for a physical examination. Her protests and tears only heightened the tension. Minutes later, a sharp cry came from the cabana. The door opened, and one of the women emerged, her face pale. She hurried to Matteo and whispered in his ear. Matteo's face crumpled. He stumbled toward the cabana, pushing the door open to find Isabella on the floor, her dress stained, utterly broken. She is the mother, his mother said, her voice trembling. It's not possible, Matteo whispered, staring at Isabella. I'm sorry, Isabella wept. I didn't know, the doctor called it a cryptic pregnancy. I only realized a few weeks ago. I was so scared of losing you. Matteo's voice was cold. Who is the father, Isabella? Is it mine? Isabella could not meet his gaze. No, Matteo. It's not yours. The air left the room. Who? Matteo's voice was a broken whisper, then a roar. Who? Isabella lifted a trembling hand and pointed. It's Diego. The pavilion erupted. Diego shot up, denying it, but the truth was written in his panic. Through her sobs, Isabella confessed a painful story of loneliness, a single mistake with a man she met online while Matteo was away on business, and how Diego had discovered her infidelity and blackmailed her into a continued affair. Matteo looked at his fiancée and his best cousin, the 2 people he trusted most, and saw only betrayal. With tears streaming down his face, he ripped the wedding ring from his finger and threw it at Isabella's feet. We're done, he whispered, and walked away without a backward glance. As the guests sat in stunned silence, the wail of police sirens cut through the air. Officers entered and arrested Isabella and her maid of honor, Sophia, for child abandonment and attempted homicide. The guests departed in a somber procession, the beautiful setting now a backdrop for heartbreak and scandal. The baby's faint cry was a lasting echo of the day's tragedy, a stark reminder that no secret, no matter how deeply buried, can stay hidden forever. The heavy silence that settled over the Azure Cove resort was broken only by the relentless crash of the waves, a sound that now felt mocking rather than serene. Matteo walked, his steps unfeeling, down the pristine beach, the white sand and turquoise water a blur. He didn't know where he was going, he only knew he had to get away from the pavilion, from the stairs, from the ruins of his life. Back under the arch of flowers, the scene was one of shattered stillness. Diego stood frozen, a statue of shame, until the weight of 100 accusing eyes finally spurred him to move. He stumbled out a side exit, fleeing the devastation he had helped create. The tracker, whose name no one had even learned, remained. He watched the police lead a sobbing Isabella and a shell-shocked Sophia away. Then, his gaze fell to the woven basket. The resort manager was hovering nervously, unsure of what to do with the tiny, crying human. With a quiet sigh, the tracker walked over and knelt. The brindled hound whined softly, nudging the basket with its nose. The tracker carefully picked up the newborn, cradling the infant with a surprising gentleness. He pulled a clean cloth from his pack and wiped the baby's face. The hospital, the tracker said to the manager, his voice brooking no argument. Now. I will ride with you. At the police station, the cold reality of handcuffs around her wrists finally cut through Isabella's hysteria. In a sterile interrogation room, the full story tumbled out, a story of panic, fear, and terrible judgment. She confirmed the tracker's account, the sudden, shocking onset of labor in the resort bathroom, Sophia's frantic help, the desperate rush into the mangroves to hide her secret, and the agonizing decision to leave the baby, hoping against hope that someone would find him. The father, the detective asked, his tone neutral. Isabella gave the name of the man she'd met online, a man who lived in another city and knew nothing of the pregnancy, let alone the wedding. A call was made. The man was shocked, then angry, then resigned. He promised to get on the next flight. Meanwhile, Mateo's father, a stern and principled man named Eduardo, found his son sitting on a rocky jetty, staring into the abyss. "Son," Eduardo said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "I can't, Dad," Mateo whispered, his voice raw. "I can't even think." "You don't have to. Not yet. But you need to know something." Eduardo placed a hand on his shoulder. "The baby is at the hospital. He's going to be fine. And, the police are questioning Diego." Mateo flinched at the name. The betrayal by Isabella was a searing pain, but the treachery of his cousin, his brother in all but blood, was a deeper, colder wound. The following days were a blur of legal proceedings. Isabella and Sofia were formally charged with child abandonment. The online contact, when he arrived, was tested for paternity. Diego, upon the insistence of Mateo's family and under threat of separate charges for blackmail and coercion, also submitted to a test. The results confirmed the unthinkable: the baby was Diego's. The news was a final, brutal blow. It made the blackmail not just a predatory act, but a calculated one to conceal his own paternity. Diego was arrested, his future now irrevocably tied to the justice system. 1 week after the wedding that wasn't, Mateo found himself standing outside the neonatal unit of the local hospital. He hadn't planned to come. But a force he didn't understand had drawn him there. Through the glass, he saw the tracker. The man was there, speaking quietly with a social worker. He had visited every day, checking on the child he'd rescued. As Mateo watched, the tracker looked up and their eyes met. There was no judgment in the tracker's gaze, only a deep, weary understanding. He gave a slight nod, then turned and walked away, his silent vigil over. The social worker, noticing Mateo, approached. "He's a fighter," she said gently, nodding toward the bassinet. "He's healthy. He'll be released into foster care soon, while the courts decide everything." Mateo looked at the baby, his cousin's son, the living evidence of his own humiliation and heartbreak. He felt a surge of anger, of resentment. But as he watched the tiny fist wave in the air, a different emotion, faint and fragile, stirred beneath the pain. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't love. It was a simple, profound acknowledgement of an innocent life caught in the crossfire of adult failings. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he would ever see Isabella again, or if he could ever face his family without this shadow hanging over them. But as he turned from the hospital window, Mateo knew one thing for certain: his old life was gone. The path ahead was uncharted, but it was his to walk alone. And for now, that was enough. 5 years later. The bell above the door of the Spice Route, a small, popular restaurant known for its bold flavors, chimed softly. Mateo looked up from the ledger, a familiar, complicated warmth spreading in his chest. A small boy with serious dark eyes and a mop of curly hair stood in the doorway, clutching the hand of his foster mother, Maria. Behind them stood the social worker, Ms. Evans, who had become a regular and welcome presence in their lives. "Lucas," Mateo said, his voice warm as he came around the counter. "You're just in time. I need a master taster for the new mango chutney." Lucas broke into a grin, his solemnity vanishing. He ran forward, and Mateo scooped him up, settling him on his hip with a practiced ease. The journey to this moment had been long and arduous. After the scandal, Mateo had sold his share of the family's import business. He'd used the capital, and a newfound passion for cooking that had become his therapy, to open this place. It was his sanctuary, built with his own hands, far from the world of country clubs and corporate deals. The decision about Lucas had been the hardest. For months, he had kept his distance, the baby a symbol of everything he had lost. But the image of that tiny, innocent face in the hospital wouldn't leave him. He started with supervised visits, his anger towards Diego and Isabella a shield he was afraid to lower. But Lucas, with his first gummy smile, his first wobbly steps, his quiet, observant nature, had chipped away at it, piece by piece. He wasn't Lucas's father. Diego was serving a 3-year sentence for his role, and Isabella had received probation and mandated therapy, moving to another state to start over. Mateo was his guardian, his Uncle Mateo, a title he wore with a fierce, protective pride. As Lucas sampled the chutney, making a show of thoughtful consideration, the door chimed again. Mateo looked up, and his breath caught. Standing there, older, her face etched with a piece he hadn't seen in years, was Isabella. She was simply dressed, her hair shorter. She held a small suitcase. "Mateo," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Lucas, sensing the shift in the air, turned and looked at her curiously. He had seen pictures. "Mama," he whispered, more a question than a statement. Mateo's heart hammered against his ribs. Isabella's probation had ended, and she had petitioned the court for reinstatement of her parental rights, with supervised visitation. He had agreed, after long discussions with therapists and lawyers. He believed in redemption, but he would never again be naive. "Isabella," he nodded, his voice carefully neutral. "You're early." "The bus got in sooner than I thought," she said, her eyes fixed on Lucas, drinking him in. He's so big." Mateo set Lucas down. "Lucas, remember we talked about this? Your mom is here to see you." Lucas hid behind Mateo's leg, peeking out. "It's okay," Mateo said softly, kneeling down. "We're all just going to have some lunch. How about that?" Later, after a quiet meal where Isabella mostly watched Lucas, too emotional to speak, she and Mateo stood outside on the sidewalk while Maria played with Lucas in a small park across the street. "Thank you, Mateo," Isabella said, tears finally welling in her eyes. "For him. For giving him all of this. I don't deserve it." Mateo looked at her, the ghost of his old pain a faint echo. "It wasn't about what you deserved," he said. "It was about what he did." He watched Lucas laugh as he chased a pigeon. "He saved me, too, in a way." Isabella nodded, wiping her tears. "I'm staying at the Cedar Inn. Just for a few days. The court said the visits can start slowly." "That's fine," Mateo said. He had built a life with boundaries, with clear lines. She was Lucas's mother, and he would facilitate that relationship for the boy's sake. But she was no longer his crossroads. She was a part of his past, and he had finally, painstakingly, built a present. As Isabella walked away, promising to return the next day, Mateo felt a hand on his arm. It was Alara, the restaurant's head chef and his partner in every sense of the word. She had a smudge of flour on her nose and her eyes were full of a quiet, steady understanding. "Okay?" she asked simply. He looked from her to Lucas, who was now running towards him, his arms outstretched. He caught the boy, swinging him up into the air, eliciting a shriek of joy. The past was a scar, not an open wound. The future was this restaurant, this woman, this child. He pulled Alara close with his free arm, kissing her flour-dusted cheek. "Yeah," Mateo said, his voice full of a certainty he had fought 5 long years to earn. "We're okay."